Hi, my name is Isabelia, and I'm 33 years old. I thought I had a steady marriage, until my husband looked at me one quiet night and said he regretted marrying me, that I was no longer good enough for him. That moment changed everything. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, this story is for you. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories about family drama, quiet revenge, and emotional courage. The night my husband told me he regretted marrying me did not arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, like a cold draft slipping under a closed window. We were sitting at the small kitchen table, the same one we bought years ago from a discount store, its surface worn smooth by time. He spoke while looking at his plate, his voice calm, almost tired. That calmness made the words cut deeper. "I don't think marrying you was the right choice," he said, as if he were sharing an ordinary thought. I remember blinking once, maybe twice. My hands rested around a chipped coffee mug I had owned long before him. I waited for the rest of the sentence, for a correction, a joke, anything. But nothing came. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second suddenly heavy. I felt heat rise to my face, but no tears followed. Instead, a strange stillness settled inside me, thick and quiet, like snow falling after a storm. I asked him what he meant, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. He said I wasn't who he imagined his life partner would be. He said I lacked drive. He said I held him back. None of his words were shouted. That made them feel carefully chosen, practiced even. I noticed how steady his hands were, how relaxed his shoulders looked. He had been carrying these thoughts for a while. I was only just hearing them. As he spoke, my mind drifted to small details. The hum of the refrigerator, a faint smell of dish soap, the way the overhead light flickered when the heat turned on. Ordinary things, grounding things. I focused on them because looking directly at him felt unbearable. I realized in that moment that I was listening to the ending of something I had been trying to hold together for years. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. That surprised even me. In the past, I would have explained myself, listed sacrifices, reminded him of shared struggles. But that night something stopped me. It was not strength yet. It was shock. My chest felt hollow, as if the air had been pulled out. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to him. Silence filled the space between us, heavy but firm. He seemed relieved by my lack of reaction. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples, as though the hard part was over. That realization stung more than his words. My pain was easier for him if it stayed quiet. I wondered how long he expected me to carry it alone. I wondered how often I had already done exactly that without noticing. When he finally stood up and said he was going to bed, I stayed at the table. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. The bedroom door closed with a soft click. That sound felt final, though nothing official had ended. I sat there for a long time, my coffee untouched, my thoughts scattered. I felt older than my years, but also oddly awake. Memories surfaced without warning. The early days of our marriage. Cheap dinners. Shared jokes. The belief that effort was enough. I remembered times I had shrunk myself to keep peace, moments I had ignored discomfort, because stability felt safer than change. Those memories did not hurt as sharply as I expected. Instead, they lined up quietly, like facts finally ready to be acknowledged. I eventually stood and rinsed my mug, my movements slow and careful. My reflection in the dark window startled me. I looked tired, yes, but there was something else there. A kind of distance in my eyes, as though I had stepped back from my own life. I touched the glass lightly, grounding myself in the cool surface. "You're still here," I whispered, unsure why I needed to say it out loud. That night, sleep did not come easily. I lay on my side of the bed, facing the wall, listening to his breathing. Each breath felt like a reminder that we were sharing space but not truth. My mind replayed his words, not in anger, but in careful review. I tested them, turned them around, examined how they landed. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I accepted that those words could not be unheard. I realized then that my silence was not agreement. It was protection. I needed time. I needed space inside myself before I could decide what came next. Speaking too soon would have meant speaking from pain. I was not ready for that. I wanted clarity, not noise. So I stayed quiet, even as my thoughts grew louder. The next morning I woke before dawn. The house felt different, like a place I was visiting rather than belonging to. I made breakfast out of habit, not hunger. When he joined me, he acted normal, even pleasant. That hurt in a new way. It told me he expected life to continue unchanged. I answered politely, keeping my voice steady, my expression neutral. Inside, something had shifted permanently. As the day went on, I noticed how often I paused before speaking. Words felt heavier now. I chose them carefully or not at all. My husband didn't comment on the change. Perhaps he didn't see it. Perhaps he didn't want to. That night had given me information I could not ignore. It had stripped away comfort and left behind truth, plain and simple. By evening, I understood that the quiet inside me was not emptiness. It was space. Space to think. Space to see my life clearly without excuses. I didn't know what I would do yet. I only knew that I would not rush. The woman who had listened silently at the kitchen table was not weak. She was waiting. That night marked the end of my need to convince him of my worth. I no longer felt the urge to defend myself or explain my heart. Something steadier had taken root. I went to bed knowing that while he believed the conversation was over, mine was only beginning. The morning after that night, I moved through the house like I always did. Except something inside me had shifted just enough to change how everything felt. I made coffee, set out 2 cups, and stood by the sink watching steam rise, noticing how quiet my thoughts were. Not peaceful, just distant. When my husband walked in, he greeted me like nothing had happened. His voice was casual, almost cheerful. I answered the same way, surprised by how easily the words came out. I kept my routine steady on purpose. I folded laundry the way I always had, lining socks carefully, smoothing shirts with slow hands. I wanted normal to stay visible on the surface. Inside, though, I had taken a step back, as if I were watching my own life through a window. I noticed how often I had filled silences before. That day I let them sit. The air felt different without my effort holding it together. At the grocery store, I caught myself reaching for his favorite cereal out of habit. My hand paused. I still put it in the cart, but the pause mattered. It was the first small moment where I realized how many of my choices had been automatic for years. Walking through the aisles, I paid attention to other people. Couples debating brands, an older woman counting change. Everyone seemed wrapped in their own quiet battles. It made me feel less alone. At home, my husband talked about his day while I prepared dinner. I listened, nodded, asked a few polite questions. I didn't lean into the conversation the way I used to. He didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't mention it. That realization brought a strange calm. I had worried my silence would create tension. Instead, it created space. Space I didn't know I needed until I felt it. In the evenings, I started spending more time in the living room instead of the bedroom. I told myself it was just for comfort, but really, I needed physical distance that didn't raise questions. I read old magazines, watched familiar shows, anything predictable. Predictability felt safe. My husband stayed busy with his phone, barely glancing up. The quiet between us stretched, not sharp, just wide. One afternoon, he asked if everything was okay. His tone was casual, almost careless. I said yes because in that moment it was the truth I could manage. Things were not okay, but they were steady. I was steady. He accepted my answer easily, and that told me more than any argument could have. He was comfortable as long as I didn't make him uncomfortable. I began to notice how often I had explained myself in the past. Why I was tired. Why I felt hurt. Why something mattered to me. Now I stopped offering reasons. If I wanted quiet, I took it. If I needed rest, I rested. These were small changes, barely visible, but they added up inside me. Each choice felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had given away without noticing. At night, lying in bed, I faced the wall again. This time my thoughts were clearer. I wasn't replaying his words anymore. I was watching my reactions, learning from them. I realized how much energy I had spent trying to be understood. Stepping back meant I didn't have to explain every feeling. Some things could belong just to me. A few days later, I met a neighbor while checking the mail. She asked how I was doing. I smiled and said fine. The word felt lighter than it used to. Fine meant I was functioning. It didn't mean I was pretending. That difference mattered. Walking back inside, I felt a quiet pride in my restraint. Not everything needed to be shared. My husband started commenting on little things. Why was dinner simpler lately? Why was I going to bed earlier? I answered calmly, without defensiveness. I could see confusion flicker across his face. He wasn't used to this version of me. The one who didn't argue or explain. The one who didn't ask for reassurance. His questions didn't pull me back in. They only confirmed that my distance was noticeable. One evening he suggested we go out like we used to. I agreed, curious about how it would feel. At the restaurant we talked about neutral things. The food, the service, the weather. I watched him closely, not with hope but with clarity. I saw how easily he filled the space with himself. How little he asked about me. That awareness didn't sting anymore. It settled quietly, like a fact finally accepted. When we got home he seemed satisfied. As if the outing had proven everything was fine. I felt tired but not defeated. I had learned something important. Normal could exist without closeness. Routine could continue without connection. That understanding was sobering, but it was also grounding. I went to sleep knowing I was no longer confused about where I stood. Over the next week, I found comfort in small private moments. Morning light through the kitchen window. The sound of birds outside. Simple things I had rushed past before. Stepping back emotionally made room for noticing life again. I wasn't pulling away to punish him. I was pulling back to see clearly. There were moments of doubt. Times when I wondered if silence was a mistake. If I should speak up, demand clarity, force change. Those thoughts came late at night, when the house was quiet. I let them pass without acting on them. Reacting would have meant giving up the calm I was building. I wasn't ready for noise yet. My husband grew more relaxed as days went on. His confidence returned. He joked more, complained less. Watching this, I understood something important. My emotional labor had been carrying more weight than I realized. Stepping back showed me how much I had been holding up alone. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me thoughtful. I started taking longer walks in the afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just extra time outside. The movement helped me think. Each step felt like a reminder that I still belonged to myself. I wasn't planning anything yet. I was simply creating distance where closeness had become heavy. By the end of that week, living normally had become a choice, not a habit. I was present but not attached. Engaged but not invested in fixing things that weren't mine to fix. Emotionally stepping back didn't make me cold. It made me clear. And in that clarity, I felt something steady begin to form, quietly, without force, waiting for its time. That steady feeling I carried at the end of the week didn't fade. It followed me into the next days, settling into my bones like something meant to stay. I woke one morning with a clear thought. I needed to understand my own life better. Not to make a scene. Not to prove anything. Just to know where I stood. So after breakfast, while my husband was busy with his phone, I pulled a small folder from the drawer where we kept old papers and receipts. I started with simple things. Bank statements. Utility bills. Insurance letters I had never really read. I spread them across the kitchen table, the same table where his words had landed days ago. This time I felt grounded. I traced numbers with my finger, reading carefully, noticing patterns. I realized how often I had trusted him to handle details because it felt easier. That ease had cost me awareness. Learning now felt like turning a light on in a room I had avoided. I didn't rush. Each evening I reviewed a little more. I memorized account balances. I wrote things down in a notebook I kept tucked inside a cookbook. It felt almost secretive, but not in a dishonest way. This was information about my own life. I had every right to it. My husband didn't notice the notebook. He was relaxed, comfortable, certain of his place. One afternoon, I drove to the local library instead of coming straight home. I hadn't been there in years. The building smelled like paper and quiet. I sat at a computer and searched for basic financial information. Things I had once found intimidating. Retirement options. Budgeting advice. Nothing dramatic. Just clarity. I printed a few pages and folded them carefully into my bag. Walking out, I felt lighter, as though I had taken my first deep breath in a long time. At home, my husband asked about dinner plans. I answered easily, already chopping vegetables. He didn't ask where I'd been. That small freedom felt new. I realized how little of my day I actually needed to explain. Independence didn't start with leaving. It started with choosing what parts of myself stayed private. A few days later, I called an old coworker I hadn't spoken to in years. We chatted about ordinary things at first. Weather. Family. Then I asked about part-time work just casually. My voice stayed steady. I wasn't begging. I was exploring. She mentioned a small opportunity, nothing guaranteed, but it sparked something inside me. Possibility. I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling slightly. Not from fear but from awareness. That night, I lay in bed thinking about skills I had once used confidently. Organization. Reliability. Care. Things I had poured into my marriage without question. Those same skills belonged to me. I hadn't lost them. I had just been using them in one place. Realizing that felt like reclaiming something valuable I had misplaced. I started setting aside a little cash from grocery trips. Small amounts that didn't disrupt anything. I wasn't hiding money. I was building reassurance. Each bill tucked away gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about escape yet. It was about knowing I could take care of myself if I needed to. My husband commented one evening that I seemed busy lately. His tone was curious, not accusing. I smiled and said I'd just been organizing things. That was true. I was organizing my thoughts, my options, my sense of self. He nodded and returned to his screen. The moment passed, unnoticed by him but meaningful to me. I cleaned out a closet one weekend, donating clothes I no longer wore. As I folded each item, I thought about how often I had kept things just because they belonged to a version of me I thought I had to maintain. Letting go felt good. The space left behind felt honest. I wasn't erasing my past. I was making room. I scheduled a routine appointment I had postponed for years. Sitting in the waiting room, I realized how long I had put my own needs second. That choice had felt normal before. Now it felt unnecessary. Independence showed up in these quiet acts of care, not grand declarations. At dinner, my husband talked about his plans, his goals, his frustrations. I listened without absorbing them. When he asked for my opinion, I offered it calmly, without trying to shape it to please him. He looked at me a little longer than usual, as if trying to read something. I held his gaze, steady and neutral. He looked away first. There were moments when fear crept in. Late nights when I wondered if I was overreacting, if this effort would amount to nothing. I let those thoughts come and go. I reminded myself that understanding my own footing was never wasted. Knowledge didn't force action. It created choice. I opened a separate email account one morning, simple and practical. I used it for job listings and personal notes. Clicking Create Account felt surprisingly emotional. It was a line drawn quietly without drama. My husband never saw the confirmation message. He didn't need to. I practiced saying things differently. Instead of "we'll see," I said, "I'll think about it." Instead of "whatever you want," I said, "I'd prefer this." These were small shifts, barely noticeable, but they strengthened something inside me. Each time I spoke with intention, I felt more present in my own life. One evening, my husband asked if I was happy. The question caught me off guard. I paused, choosing honesty without invitation to debate. "I'm figuring things out," I said. He seemed unsure how to respond. The silence stretched, then broke as he changed the subject. I realized then that clarity unsettled him more than conflict ever had. I began waking earlier, enjoying the quiet before the house stirred. I drank my coffee slowly, planning my day with care. Independence wasn't loud. It was steady. It lived in these mornings, in these choices that belonged only to me. As days passed, I felt less reactive, less tied to his moods. My confidence didn't come from certainty about the future. It came from trust in myself. Trust that I could learn, adapt, and stand on my own feet if needed. By the end of that period, I understood something deeply. He hadn't noticed my steps because they weren't meant for him. They were meant for me. Quiet, deliberate, unseen. And that was exactly why they mattered. He didn't notice it all at once. The change came to him slowly, the way weather shifts without warning. One morning, as I poured coffee, I felt his eyes on me longer than usual. Not with warmth, not with concern, but with confusion. I handed him his cup, our fingers brushing briefly. He flinched just slightly, like he'd touched something unfamiliar. I pretended not to see it. That day, he asked what my plans were. The question sounded casual, but there was tension underneath it. I told him I'd be out for a bit, nothing specific. In the past, I would have explained every detail. Now I simply smiled and picked up my keys. His eyebrows drew together as I left, as though he wanted to ask more but didn't know how without sounding suspicious. When I returned later, he was quieter than usual. He watched me move around the kitchen, noticed how I didn't rush to fill the silence. The radio stayed off. The room felt wide. He cleared his throat and commented that the house felt different lately. I agreed calmly without adding anything else. The answer unsettled him more than disagreement would have. Over the next few days his questions increased. Small ones at first. Where had I gone? Who had I talked to? Was everything okay between us? His tone tried to sound light, but I heard the edge beneath it. I answered honestly but briefly. Nothing secretive. Nothing emotional. Just facts. He nodded each time, but his shoulders stayed tight. One evening he criticized the way I folded his shirts. It was something he'd done before casually without thinking. This time I didn't apologize or redo them. I met his eyes and said they were folded well enough. My voice didn't shake. The moment hung between us, thick and still. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I carried the laundry away without another word. That was when I saw it clearly. He wasn't angry. He was unsettled. The version of me he knew relied on reassurance, explanation, compromise. This version didn't offer any of that. I wasn't punishing him. I simply wasn't bending anymore. That difference threw him off balance. He started hovering more in shared spaces, sitting at the kitchen table while I cooked, standing in doorways, watching television without really watching it. I felt his attention on me like a weight, but I didn't let it change my pace. I moved calmly, deliberately, as though nothing unusual was happening. Inside, I felt steady, grounded in my own quiet certainty. One afternoon, he asked if I was upset with him. I considered the question carefully. Upset implied emotion still tied to his behavior. No, I said. I'm just focused on myself right now. The words were simple, but they landed hard. His face shifted, something like disbelief passing across it. He wasn't used to not being the center of my attention. Later that night he tried humor. Light jokes. Old stories. I smiled politely, but I didn't lean in. I didn't reach for his hand. The distance was gentle, not cruel. Still, it changed the air between us. He stopped talking and stared at the television, jaw tight. I went to bed early, leaving him there. Sleep came easily that night. I woke rested, something I hadn't felt in a long time. At breakfast he studied me again, searching for something familiar. I met his gaze without flinching. He looked away first. That small moment told me everything I needed to know. The shift wasn't imagined. He felt it. A few days later he suggested counseling, suddenly, awkwardly. The offer felt less like concern and more like an attempt to regain footing. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't reject the idea. I didn't embrace it either. His relief was brief, followed by frustration. He wanted certainty. I wasn't ready to give it. He began adjusting his behavior. Compliments appeared where criticism once lived. Offers of help. Questions about my day. On the surface it looked like effort. Underneath I sensed urgency. He was responding to the loss of control, not the damage done. I accepted his kindness without rewarding it. I didn't soften. I didn't harden. I stayed exactly where I was. One evening we argued over something small. A bill. A missed call. In the past, arguments like that would spiral. This time I stated my point calmly and stopped talking. He kept going, his voice rising, trying to pull a reaction from me. I listened until he ran out of words. The silence afterward felt powerful. He looked exhausted. I felt clear. After that, his attempts grew less confident. He seemed unsure which version of himself to present. Charming one day, irritated the next. I stayed consistent, predictable, grounded. That steadiness frustrated him more than unpredictability ever could. He couldn't argue with calm. He couldn't compete with quiet resolve. I noticed changes in myself too. I no longer anticipated his moods. I no longer adjusted my tone to keep peace. I spoke plainly. I rested when I was tired. I laughed when something amused me, even if he wasn't included. My life felt fuller, even within the same walls. One afternoon he asked if I still loved him. The question hung heavy between us. I answered honestly but carefully. I care, I said. Not a lie. Not the whole truth either. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing a loss he hadn't expected. That night he slept restlessly. I didn't. As days passed, his discomfort became more visible. He checked in more often, asked where I was going, what I was thinking. I gave him what I was willing to share and no more. The boundary wasn't spoken. Didn't need to be. He felt it every time he reached and came up empty. One evening he admitted he felt like he was losing me. The statement sounded raw, almost frightened. I looked at him carefully before responding. I haven't gone anywhere, I said. And it was true. I was right there, just no longer within his grasp. He nodded, but his eyes stayed troubled. That was when I understood the full weight of the shift. He couldn't control it because it didn't belong to him. It lived inside me. It was built from awareness, from quiet decisions, from choosing myself without announcement. There was nothing he could argue against. Nothing he could fix without facing the truth. By the end of that stretch of days, the balance between us had changed permanently. He felt it in every unanswered question, every calm response, every moment I chose myself without asking permission. And I felt it too, steady and unshakable. Like standing on solid ground after years of unsure footing. The morning felt different. The sunlight slipped through the blinds at an angle that made the kitchen counters glow. And for the first time in years, I noticed it without distraction. I had made my decision days ago, carefully, quietly, but today it was real. Today I would leave. Not with yelling, not with confrontation, not with a dramatic scene designed to punish, but with the calm certainty of someone who had finally claimed her own life. I moved through the house methodically. Each action was deliberate. I packed the clothes I had set aside for months, the small stack of personal items I had accumulated during my quiet steps toward independence. Each piece folded carefully into a bag I had purchased without fanfare. I wasn't rushing. I was choosing. I paused at the small stack of notebooks I had filled with observations, budgets, and plans. They went in as well. These were more than pages. They were my proof of clarity, of preparation, of self-respect. He appeared in the kitchen as I zipped the bag, casual and unaware. "Heading out?" he asked, tone neutral, perhaps slightly curious. I nodded, keeping my voice even. "Yes. I'll be back later." He didn't ask where. He didn't press. I had given him nothing to grasp onto, no drama to unravel. The silence between us was thick but not uncomfortable. For the first time it felt like my silence was an advantage. He had grown accustomed to my compliance, my explanations, my emotional labor. Now there was none, and it unsettled him in a way words never could. I walked past him to the door, each step quiet, deliberate. I noticed the small details of the house, as if seeing them for the first time. The chipped corner of the coffee table, the faint stain on the kitchen floor, the smell of lemon cleaner lingering from yesterday's cleaning. It all belonged to me now, but it no longer defined me. I opened the front door and stepped outside, the cool morning air brushing against my face. I inhaled deeply. Freedom had a scent, and it was crisp, real, and mine. The drive felt surreal. I kept the radio low, letting my thoughts move freely. I thought about the years I had given, the energy I had spent molding myself into someone he could accept, and the slow accumulation of moments that had built the person I had become in silence. I didn't feel bitter, I felt strong. The calm determination in my chest was steadier than any anger could ever be. I realized that leaving quietly, without spectacle, gave me power in a way confrontation never could. I arrived at a small apartment I had secured in secret, nothing fancy, just a space that was entirely mine. As I carried my bag inside, I felt the tension in my shoulders release for the first time in years. I set the bag down and breathed again. Each item I unpacked felt like a symbol of my reclaiming. Notebooks on the desk, clothes in the drawers, personal items on the shelves. Every small choice reinforced the reality that I had chosen myself, not in reaction to him, not in vengeance, but because I deserved to be the center of my own life. That afternoon I sat by the window, sipping a cup of tea, listening to the faint hum of the street below. The ordinary sounds, cars passing, neighbors chatting, dogs barking, felt like a celebration in their simplicity. I reflected on how much I had given away over the years and how easily I had justified it in the name of keeping peace, of maintaining a household, of being enough. Now being enough meant nothing but being true to myself. A message popped up on my phone from a friend checking in. I smiled and typed back, careful not to disclose too much. yet enough to signal that I was safe, capable, and in control. It felt good to reconnect without obligation, without the weight of expectation. I realized independence wasn't only about leaving someone. It was about reconnecting with the parts of myself I had left behind for too long. Evening came and I prepared dinner in the small kitchen, enjoying the act of cooking for myself. I didn't have to accommodate anyone else's tastes, habits, or complaints. I chopped vegetables deliberately, stirring a simple sauce, savoring the aromas. The experience felt meditative, affirming. The quiet allowed me to hear my own thoughts clearly, uninterrupted, validating the decisions I had made and the calm strength I had nurtured. That night I didn't wait for calls or texts. I didn't wonder if he realized I had gone. I didn't dwell on what he might think or feel. My attention stayed on me. I wrote in my notebook for a while, documenting plans, dreams, and the small victories of the day. Each word was deliberate, a declaration of autonomy. I closed the notebook, set it aside, and sat in the dim light, absorbing the peaceful stillness. Sleep came naturally. I woke refreshed, unburdened, ready to face a life designed by my own choices. I walked through my morning routine with the same care as before, but now without restraint. The independence I had nurtured quietly had become tangible, filling each room of the apartment, each moment of my day. I didn't feel the pangs of guilt I had once feared. I felt pride, calm, and clarity. I started organizing small aspects of daily life that had been neglected in the chaos of emotional compromise. Bills, schedules, groceries, appointments, all manageable. The act of managing them independently wasn't just practical. It was symbolic. Each small decision reinforced that I had regained control over my life. There was no need for him to witness it, no need for drama. The quietness of my actions held more impact than any confrontation ever could. When friends visited, I noticed how differently I interacted with them. I laughed freely, shared my thoughts without filtering, and engaged without overthinking their reactions. I could be myself completely. These small social moments, once tinged with self-consciousness, now felt liberating. Every smile, every word, every gesture affirmed the choice I had made to leave calmly and prioritize my own life. As the days passed, I filled my new routine with intentional actions. Exercise, reading, walks in the park. Ordinary things but performed with purpose. Each act reinforced the strength I had quietly cultivated while still in the house I had left behind. I began to notice a subtle shift in my energy, a sense of presence I hadn't experienced in years. Independence wasn't just logistical. It was emotional, spiritual, and profoundly healing. One afternoon I sat on a park bench, watching families and couples pass by. I observed without envy, without longing. Their lives were theirs just as mine was now mine. I realized that leaving without drama wasn't about denying him anything. It was about giving myself everything. The calm, deliberate choice I had made protected my dignity and gave me peace, a far more lasting reward than anger or revenge could ever provide. I started pursuing small goals I had shelved for years. Online courses, hobbies, projects. All activities that centered around my own growth. Each accomplishment, no matter how minor, reinforced the understanding that my life was finally mine to design. I didn't need validation from anyone else. I didn't need him to notice. The independence I had quietly built had matured into confidence, and that confidence radiated through every decision, every interaction. At night, I reflected on the contrast between the woman I had been and the woman I had become. The fear, the self-doubt, the constant need to explain and justify myself, all had been replaced by steady, deliberate choices. I didn't feel the urge to check his reactions, to anticipate his moods, or to mold myself for approval. That liberation was profound, subtle, and life-changing. I knew that one day he would realize I was gone. Maybe he already suspected, or maybe it would take weeks. I didn't wait. I didn't watch. I didn't react. My focus remained on nurturing the calm strength I had cultivated over weeks of careful, quiet preparation. The absence of spectacle did not lessen the significance of my actions. On the contrary, leaving without drama made my departure complete, clean, and entirely my own. I set routines that reminded me daily of my independence. Morning stretches by the window, breakfast with the newspaper, journaling under soft lamplight. Each choice reminded me that my life was mine to orchestrate. There was no resentment in my routine, only clarity and purpose. The quiet steps I had taken to achieve independence now ripened into a daily practice of self-care, responsibility, and joy. Through it all, I noticed subtle emotions I had ignored for years. Relief, pride, clarity, even happiness. They were quieter than dramatic highs, but far more satisfying. I didn't need to shout, confront, or demand recognition. I had chosen myself, and that choice resonated more powerfully than any scene could have. By the end of the first week in my new space, I recognized the magnitude of what I had done. Independence had been built in small, deliberate steps, invisible to him. My life, my choices, my presence, all fully reclaimed. The quietness of my departure had allowed me to retain dignity, peace, and control. I had escaped not just a home, but the patterns that had kept me small. The final truth settled in gently, without fanfare. Freedom wasn't about dramatics. It wasn't about proving him wrong or making him regret. Freedom was about creating a life I could inhabit fully, without compromise, without apology, and without apology or spectacle. In choosing myself quietly and deliberately, I had discovered the power I had carried all along. And in that quiet, intentional life, I realized something remarkable. The calmest choices often carry the most weight, and the strength to leave without drama is a power few understand, but it is a power that lasts forever.